Thank you. I certainly want to thank Mr. Ventry and everybody at the school for their warm welcome. Had a very lively conversation with the students throughout the day, which was great fun. But anyhow, I have prepared a handout for you. We're going to cover a lot of evidence tonight. I'm going to cite a great many scholarly papers rather quickly. And I have prepared a handout. The first function of the handout is to save you the trouble of taking notes. Can we bring the house lights down? Create a sense of drama here. To save you the trouble of taking notes, the handout is, first of all, the notes that I would take if I were attending the presentation. So all the main points of the presentation are in the handout, plus some additional information. The handout is also an annotated bibliography. So if you'd like to read the primary sources, which I encourage you to do, you will find all those citations provided in the handout, which is many pages. Many years ago, I used to have a printed handout, but it's very distracting, people flipping through a dozen pages. And the talk does not strictly follow the handout. So don't pull the handout up now. It's not intended for a phone. It's just intended for at least a laptop-sized screen. The main point of the handout is really a week or two from tonight when you think to yourself, you know, there was something useful in that talk, but I can't remember what it was. My hope is that looking at the handout will jog your memory. So the handout is my name, leonardsax.com/Glenelg.pdf, all lowercase, and it is case sensitive, and you must include the www and the .pdf. And I will show you this link again. So can we bring the house lights down a little more? It makes the slides a little more dramatic. I'm going to begin with a question for you. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands and indicate your answer. This question is based on a longitudinal cohort study. In this case, a study where children were recruited at a very young age and then followed right through childhood, through adolescence, and into adulthood, right up to 32 years of age. When the children were 12 years of age, each child was interviewed so that the researchers could obtain for each child a quantitative measure of each child's openness to new ideas, work with the school to get a combined measure of grade point average and IQ, a quantitative measure of emotional stability, friendliness and agreeableness, and self-control at 12 years of age. And then each child was followed for 20 more years. These studies required tremendous investment of time and energy over many decades. 20 years later, when these kids are now 32 years of age, you track them down, interview them, interview their neighbors, and for each of these individuals, you get a measure of health, wealth, and happiness, life satisfaction. One of the 5 measures shown here, obtained at age 12, powerfully predicts health and wealth and happiness in that individual 20 years down the road, but only one of these 5. The other 4 predict one or none of those 3 principal outcomes, the 3 principal outcomes being health, wealth, and happiness. I'm not saying all of these parameters I think are important. I'm not saying that any of them are unimportant, but only one of these 3, only one of these 5 predicts health and wealth and happiness 20 years down the road and predicts it powerfully. I'd like to ask you which you think it is. Raise your hand if you think it is openness to new ideas. Thank you. Hands down. Don't look at your neighbor. They don't know. Raise your hand if you think it's a combined measure of grade point average and IQ. Raise your hand if you think it is emotional stability. you. Friendliness and agreeableness. Thank you. Self-control. Thank you. All right, going to keep you in suspense. If you leave early, you won't get the answer. But if you stick it out, you will get the answer. And I hope you'll get more than that. I hope you'll get some tips that will be useful to you as a parent, speaking parent to parent. So I want to begin by going back more than 50 years. 50-some years ago, scholars in the United States were studying immigrants to this country, kids who had arrived from overseas, kids who did not speak English at home. And a very robust finding in the 50s and 60s were that such immigrants were at risk. When kids arrived in this country from overseas and did not speak English at home, they were at increased risk for anxiety and depression compared to kids born in the United States. And so a consensus arose 50-some years ago that when children of immigrants arrive in this country from overseas and they don't speak English at home, we should get them speaking English at home, not as a matter of cultural imperialism, but to improve outcomes. Because there was good evidence, scholarly evidence in that era, that if you got kids speaking English at home, help them to assimilate into American culture, you would improve outcomes. You would decrease the risk of anxiety and depression for those children. The very first link in your handout is a citation to Dr. Milton Gordon, who edited a monograph devoted to this topic, published by Oxford University Press, collecting the scholarly evidence that indeed becoming American, learning English, assimilating into American culture, improved outcomes for children 50-some years ago. I am not suggesting that 50 years ago were the good old days. They were not. That era was much more racist and sexist than our own. There are no good old days. Every era has its challenges. But I think we can learn from the past. And by contrasting the past with the present, I think we can understand our challenges better. 50 years ago, when a child came to this country from overseas and learned to speak English and assimilated into American culture, that improved outcomes for that child. That was true 50 years ago. It is not true today. On the contrary, the reverse is now true. To understand what scholars mean by the immigrant paradox, it's helpful to imagine two families living in adjacent homes right here. The families are similar in many ways. Both families consist of a mother, a father, a teenage son, and a teenage daughter. The ages are the same in both households. The occupations of the parents are the same in both households, and the household income is the same in both households. The main difference between the two households is that in one household, mother, father, son, and daughter were born in the United States, and they speak English at home. In the adjacent household, mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in Bangalore, India. And they do not speak English at home. They've just arrived here. They speak Gujarati in the home. Now, in which home are we more likely to find that the teenage girl is binge drinking, is cutting herself with razor blades, has been diagnosed with an eating disorder, has been diagnosed with anxiety or depression? On each of those parameters, it is now many times more likely that the American girl has those problems compared to the girl who just arrived here from India. In which home are we more likely to find that the teenage boy says school's a stupid waste of time, or has been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, or has been arrested for street racing? On each of those parameters, it is many times more likely that the American boy has those problems compared to the boy who just arrived from India. And when scholars first began to document this about 15 years ago, they were startled, because many of those scholars themselves were educated in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They were raised on the earlier literature showing that being foreign-born, as the phrase was a risk factor, and that kids born and raised in this country had an advantage compared to foreign-born kids. So they thought it was paradoxical that they were finding that the reverse is true. Hence the term the Immigrant Paradox. Children of immigrants who do not speak English at home now do much better on many parameters compared to children born and raised in the United States. I'm a medical doctor, I'm a practicing physician. When doctors use the term dose-response effect in regard to a toxin, we mean that the more of the toxin you're exposed to and the longer the time that you're exposed to it, the greater the risk of an adverse effect. That's what doctors mean by a dose-response effect in toxicology. That boy, that girl who've just arrived here from India, the first week that they are here, the first month that they are here, they are very unlikely to have any of these bad outcomes. But if they stay here for months or years, and especially if they begin to speak English at home as a marker of assimilation into American culture, their risk rises. The more a child is exposed to American culture, the greater the likelihood of an adverse outcome. We now find a dose-response effect for exposure to American culture. That's what researchers mean when they say that American culture, American popular culture, is toxic to children and teenagers. That is intended not in a derogatory or pejorative sense, but merely in a descriptive sense. The more a child is exposed to American culture, the greater the risk of a bad outcome, the greater the risk of a psychiatric diagnosis. What happened? Why is becoming American and participating in American culture now a major risk factor for anxiety, depression, drug and alcohol use, disengagement from school, and many other bad outcomes? This was not true of the United States 50 years ago or 30 years ago. It is true of the United States today. To answer that question, I think it's helpful to talk to the comparative anthropologists, people who have spent their lives studying other cultures, how other people have lived in other times and other places, as I did in writing my book, Boys Adrift. I talked with Gilbert Hurd, and especially with David Gilmour at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. I said to Dr. Gilmour, talk to me about cultures that last, that have been around for thousands of years, enduring cultures. Is there anything that all enduring cultures share? Well, if you had asked that question in terms of what they eat, what they're prohibited from eating, how they dress, or what their religious beliefs are, the answer is no. There is nothing on those parameters that all enduring cultures share. Let's consider the Navajo, the native people of the Southwest, and let's contrast them with Orthodox Jews. These are two cultures that have been around for thousands of years. They're still with us. We know a lot about them. And they have practically nothing in common on the parameters I just mentioned: what they eat, what they don't eat, how they dress. Their religious beliefs could not be more different. And that's one reason I choose those two as exemplars. But there is one thing they share. One thing the anthropologists tell us all enduring cultures share. All enduring cultures are characterized by strong bonds of respect across generations. Now, if you know only a little about the Navajo, and someone says, what's Glenelg? What is it? What does that word mean? You might respond that it is a rite of passage for Navajo girls. When a Navajo girl has her first menstrual period, she stays in the home of her grandmother for 4 days and 4 nights, and during those 4 days and nights, all of her adult female relatives, aunts and cousins, call on her, and she demonstrates to them, as this girl is doing, that she has indeed mastered the arts and crafts of Glenelg. And that's true as far as it goes, but it's more than a rite of passage. It's a process that's been going on usually 2, 3, 4 years by the time this girl finally gets her menstrual period. Mom, incidentally, plays very little role in teaching this girl the arts and crafts of Glenelg, those arts and crafts that are taught by Navajo women to girls and only to girls. The grandmothers and women of the grandmother's age take the lead. And that's a common but not universal feature of enduring cultures, that it is the grandparents and the grandparents' generation that take the lead in teaching traditional arts and crafts. You have a community of women for girls, a community of men for boys. Now, everybody's heard of bar mitzvah, but if you're not connected to someone in the Orthodox Jewish community, you may not know that every aspect of religious life in the Orthodox community is single sex. Boys and men worship here. There's a barrier. Women and girls worship here. Every Saturday morning in an Orthodox synagogue, you read a particular portion from the 5 books of Moses. When you get to the end of that cycle, finish the last chapter of Deuteronomy, and now you're going to start over with Genesis 1:1. That night, all the men, and only the men, stay up traditionally dusk till dawn, singing and dancing. You have older men with younger men with boys. You have a community of men for boys. A community of men teaches each boy, this is what it means to be a Jewish man. This is what is expected of a Jewish man. That's not that boy's father. It's another man in the synagogue. A community of women teaches each girl, this is what is expected of a Jewish girl. This is what it means to be a Jewish woman. Now, the content is completely different. What that Jewish girl is learning is totally different from what the Navajo girl is learning. There's essentially no overlap in the content. But the process is the same. In each case, you have a community of women for girls, a community of men for boys, strong bonds across generations. Strong bonds across generations, the anthropologists tell us, is a universal feature of every enduring culture, of every culture that lasts. And it was once a characteristic of our culture. By our culture, I mean North American Anglophone secular. Anglophone means English-speaking. Secular means not Amish, not Hutterite, not Mennonite. And this is not a guess, and this is not nostalgia. This is the work of a number of researchers, most notably Robert Putnam at Harvard, who's devoted much of the last 20 years to documenting that 50 years ago, we had very strong bonds across generations in the United States. He has led an army of graduate students across the United States who have conducted more than 200,000 structured interviews, documenting that 50 years ago, you could go into any town in the United States, in the early 60s certainly, and on almost any block you'd find a sewing circle or a quilting circle, organized not by kin relation, but by geographic proximity, which is a fancy way of saying the girls and women in the sewing circle weren't related to each other, they just lived on the same block. He documents not only formal but also informal associations. 50 years ago, he documents you could drive around any town in the United States on a Saturday afternoon and you'd come across a bunch of guys working under the hood of a car. And he documents who were those guys. Older men with younger men with teenage boys working together. Very common in this country in that era. Today, you can drive around the United States on a Saturday afternoon and you might see two old geezers working under the hood of their '65 Corvette, but the boys are not with them. teenage boys are indoors, perhaps playing a video game. Bowling used to be more common in the United States, but more important, from Dr. Putnam's perspective, it was done differently. 50 years ago, most of the bowling that happened in the United States was in bowling leagues. And Tuesday night might be the women's night, and Thursday night was the men's night. And again, his graduate students dig up the records. Who was in the bowling league in Laurel, Maryland in 1964? All right, well, here's a team. We had a 53-year-old woman, a 37-year-old woman, a 26-year-old woman, a 17-year-old girl, and a 12-year-old girl, all on the same bowling team that bowled Tuesday evening. Kids in the United States still go bowling, but they go bowling alone, the title of Dr. Putnam's best-known book. Meaning not literally alone, but instead of this 17-year-old girl going bowling with a community of women of different ages, she's going bowling with a bunch of 17-year-olds, girls and boys mixed together, which as far as Dr. Putnam is concerned is bowling alone. When Dr. Putnam uses the term community, he means bonds across generations. When he talks about the collapse of American community, he means that the bonds have been broken. And it's a very worthwhile book to read, but it gets a bit redundant as he documents over and over and over again how the dozens, hundreds of mechanisms that were strong and robust in the United States 50 years ago, creating bonds across generations, every one of them has disintegrated. The breaking of bonds across generations is a major change. Again, the question we open with tonight is, what happened in the United States? Becoming American used to protect you against anxiety and depression. Today, becoming American is a major risk factor for anxiety and depression. American kids are much more likely to have psychiatric diagnosis, factors of 10 more likely today to have psychiatric diagnosis compared to kids in Scotland, in Switzerland, in Germany, in New Zealand. I've spoken on this topic in each of those countries, and I defend that statement at some length in my book, The Collapse of Parenting. So that's one big change, the breaking of bonds across generations, but it is not the whole story. We've got a ways to go. For another important and consequential change in American culture, we need to look at the work of James Coleman, sociologist at Johns Hopkins, who 50 years ago led teams of researchers across the United States to interview American teenagers. And one of the questions that Dr. Coleman and his team would ask in these structured interviews, they would ask American teens, if all of your friends wanted you to join a particular club, but one of your parents did not approve, would you still join? And 50 years ago, the majority of American teens said no, they would not join. Because 50 years ago, American teens valued their parents' good opinion above the combined opinion of all their friends. I have visited more than 400 schools over the last 17 years. And from 2007 through 2015, I asked students at many schools across Maryland, the Mid-Atlantic region, and across the United States. I asked them, if all your friends wanted you to sign up for a particular social media site, would you consult your parents first? And the most common answer I got from American teens was not yes, was not no, it was laughter. It burst out laughing. One girl said, my parents would probably think Ask FM is some kind of radio station. Why would I ask them? Now, these kids may say they love their parents, but the opinion of same-age peers matters more. And that's a really big change of great consequence. Why? Because most cultures are characterized by strong attachment across generations. And the kids look to the grown-ups for guidance. But American kids today are oriented toward the marketplace, researchers find, are looking to the marketplace, and their primary attachment is to peers rather than to parents. Many researchers have found. Why does it matter, and what's the difference? It matters because good parents offer unconditional attachment and affection, but peers can't. Good parents nurture, but peers do not. Good parents sacrifice for their children, but peers rarely do so for same-age friends. My daughter is 11 years old. Suppose she were to say to me, "I hate you. I never want to talk to you ever again as long as I live." Well, her mother and I would discuss and decide what privileges she would lose and for how long as a consequence of that outburst. But nothing fundamental would change. She would not lose her place in our home. We wouldn't stop loving her. There is nothing that she could do or say that would make us stop loving her. And she knows that. So she can relax in that unconditional love. But suppose she says the same words to a friend at school. "I hate you. I never want to talk to you ever again as long as I live." That friendship is over, or it is at least badly damaged. Peer relations are contingent and ephemeral. You can go from being the most popular girl to being the odd girl out in one day, in 5 minutes, and every girl knows it. You want to see an American girl have a meltdown? Take her phone from her without warning. And she will totally freak out. She'll be like, "My friends don't know I don't have my phone. What if Sonia texts me and I don't respond? She's going to think I'm ignoring her. She's going to think I don't like her." And so you see these American girls glued to their mobile phones. Because God forbid 5 minutes passes without you promptly responding. You have to keep checking for a text. That's another big change. American culture today is characterized by that prioritizing of same-age peer relations over parent-child relations. And that is new, and it is harmful. That's a second change. And we're not done. Most cultures have taught respect for parents. That is an enduring feature of cultures that last. And it was true of American culture 50 years ago. Even if the parents themselves were lousy parents who never said a word about it, didn't matter. If this kid spoke English at home, they were immersed in a culture that did teach it. You look at the most popular TV shows from 50 years ago. Shows like Father Knows Best, My Three Sons, The Andy Griffith Show. The parents in those shows are knowledgeable, competent, reliable, productive, caring, and kind. Not anymore. In writing my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I reviewed the 150 most popular television shows in the United States by viewers. Not one of them consistently or even often portrays a parent as knowledgeable, competent, reliable. On the contrary, the longest-running comedy in the United States, The Simpsons, the father is a bum, the son's an idiot, the wife varies. Sometimes she's clever, more often she is not. The only one of the four major characters who is consistently wise and insightful is the daughter, Lisa, much wiser than her parents. But I'm not picking on The Simpsons here. I don't blame this show. I don't see these shows as causes. I see them as symptoms. I really have a great regard for the people who write for The Simpsons. I think they have real insight into what's happened in American culture. In one episode, you get to see inside Homer Simpson's brain. Homer Simpson's brain has three major drives: sleep, donuts, and beer. I think there's real insight there. 50 years ago, if you imagine a television show depicting the brain of an American man, it probably would have shown the entire brain as a sex drive. That was the stereotype of the American man 50 years ago, that he was always interested in sex. Not anymore. Now it's sleep, donuts, and beer. I think there's real insight there. The testosterone level of American men has dropped by more than half over the last 50 years. And that's especially striking among younger men. Testosterone level of a 20-year-old man today is roughly the testosterone level of a 50-year-old man in 1960. Doctors report prescribing more Viagra for men under 30 than for men over 40. So something important has happened here. The most popular TV shows consistently portray the father as incompetent. The Modern Family, the straight dad is clueless, idiotic. His children, especially his oldest daughter, are consistently wiser and more insightful. We laugh at the dad because of all the stupid things he does. If you don't watch the Disney Channel, you might think, oh, Disney, that's probably family friendly. It is not. The Disney Channel is a major vector of the culture of disrespect. This show, Dog with a Blog, the father, supposedly a school psychologist, knows nothing about the behavior or motivation of children. The talking dog is wiser and more insightful than the school psychologist dad. Liv and Maddie, another Disney Channel show. The two girls are as different as they can be. The one thing they agree on is that their mother, also supposedly a school psychologist, knows nothing about what kids want or what kids need. Both girls roll their eyes at the idiotic suggestions made by their dopey, clueless mom. This is characteristic of American television today. It's a big change. Girls and boys do not naturally become ladies and gentlemen. They have to be taught. We no longer teach them. And so they turn to the marketplace for some guidance about what it means to be a man or a woman. And the American marketplace has changed. It used to be a much healthier place. That's Sam Cooke. 50 years ago, he had a #1 hit song in the United States. He sang, "Don't Know Much About History." He sang, "Now I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be, because maybe by being an A student baby, I could win your love for me." He goes on to mention French, geometry, and trigonometry as subjects in which he's going to work harder to earn an A instead of a B, because he believes that being an A student will raise his status in the eyes of the pretty girl. And this was a #1 hit song. 50 years ago, American popular culture, the culture of people who spoke English at home, was the culture of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Simon and Garfunkel. Not anymore. Today, American popular culture, the culture of children and teens who speak English at home, is the culture of Eminem, Nicki Minaj, Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, Akon. Looking around this room, I see some elderly people, by which I mean people over 40. I find that people over 40 have never heard of Akon, so let me enlighten you. Akon is a singer very popular with American teens, white and black. He chose the name Akon to remind you of his claim. He claims to be a con. He claims to be a convicted felon. He claims to have served 2 years for grand theft auto in the Georgia State Penitentiary, a claim which turns out to be false. When he got to be famous, the reporters looked it up, and they found that, well, he was arrested on a charge of possession of 1 item of stolen property. Those charges were quickly dismissed. He's never been convicted of anything. And he's never been inside a penitentiary except to perform. American popular culture has changed from a culture in which young men wanted you to think they were scholars working hard to get an A in trigonometry to a culture in which many young men would like you to think they're convicted felons or gang members, even if they are not. That's a substantial change. It's impossible to imagine Akon, Eminem, Justin Bieber, or Justin Timberlake singing a song about how they're going to try harder to get an A instead of a B on their French quiz, except as a joke. So the first chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, is titled The Culture of Disrespect, the culture in which American kids are now immersed. When I use the phrase the culture of disrespect, I don't mean only that American popular culture now teaches children to be disrespectful to adults, although it does. I mean also that American popular culture now teaches kids to be disrespectful to one another. It is common to find American kids wearing t-shirts that they say things like, "Do I look like I care? I'm out of your league. You look better on Facebook. You look like I need another drink." Or, "I'm not shy, I just don't like you." You do not find these t-shirts outside of North America. I was speaking to students in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in Perthshire, and in Stirling, and I showed them some of these t-shirts, and the kids in Scotland were puzzled. Why, they asked, would anyone go out of their house wearing a t-shirt that proclaims to the whole world, "I don't like you"? To the kids in Scotland, that didn't seem funny, it just seemed rude and really incomprehensible. But American kids immersed in the culture of disrespect find this sort of thing funny. I was in Sydney, Australia, and actually saw a teenager wearing a t-shirt with these words, different t-shirt, but the same words, "I'm not shy, I just don't like you." And I went up to him, turned out he was an American kid on vacation. We have addressed three major changes in American culture. Again, our opening question is, what happened in American culture? American culture used to be healthy for children, and assimilating into American culture improved outcomes for immigrants. American culture is now unhealthy for children, and assimilating into American culture makes outcomes worse for immigrants. What happened? We've identified three major changes that I believe are relevant. One is the breaking of bonds across generations. Another is the prioritizing of same-age peer relations over parent-child relations. And a third is the culture of disrespect. We need to address one more. And this is not the whole story, there's more to it, but our time is limited. And the final factor we're going to consider tonight is social media. This has happened really quickly. And I think it's worth one slide to recall that 14 years ago, Facebook did not exist. Hard to believe, but true. According to Nielsen, more than half of American girls at 12 years of age are now on Instagram. 8 years ago, Instagram did not exist. It is now a major player in the lives of American teen girls, and it's less than 8 years old. Why does it matter? To understand why I think this is important, I want you to imagine a girl living in ancient times. By ancient times, I mean 1998, 20 years ago. It's the evening. She's writing in her diary, by which I mean she's writing with a pen in a bound volume of blank pages. She's writing about who she likes, who she doesn't like, the kind of girl she most admires, the kind of woman she hopes to become. She might write 5 pages in an evening. Not going to show that to anybody. If she's a younger brother, she might keep it under lock and key. But she's doing some important work. She's figuring out, who am I? Who do I want to become? What do I really want? The great American psychologist, Dr. Abraham Maslow, said that figuring out what you want is not trivial. He believed that many adults are unhappy because they're working hard at jobs they don't like in pursuit of goals that are not meaningful to them. So this girl, writing 5 pages, figuring out, what do I really want? She's doing some important work. Earlier today, I met with middle school students and high school students here. I asked them, who's on Instagram? Most of the hands went up. Who's on Facebook? A few hands went up. Who's on Snapchat? All the hands went up. Who here has a diary? I met with middle school students, high school students. 2, 3 hands in this room, which was filled, went up. And I'm not picking on this school. That's a universal finding across the United States. Kids don't keep diaries anymore. They're on social media instead. Because kids are busy. And there's not enough time in the day to do both. And social media is more important because other kids are watching. Social media have crowded out the diary. So I asked the kids, what's the difference between posting on Instagram and writing in a diary? And one girl named Emma said, social media is public, diary is private. Bingo. Social media is public. You're not going to find any 5-page essays about what my goals are in life on social media. You could, in theory, but you don't. Researchers who've studied how American teens use social media find nobody's posting lengthy essays or essays at all. They're posting photos. This is true of girls, this is true of boys. It turns out that girls are posting more photos than boys. How much more? 50% more? 80% more? No, it's 500% more. Girls are posting 5 times as many photos as the boys are, and the photos are different. Boy and a girl both go to the football game, and they both take pictures at the football game. Turns out the boy is taking a picture of the game, or of the pretty cheerleader at the game. The girl's turning the phone on herself, and she's taking 100 selfies at the game. And then that evening she's going through the 100 selfies to find 2 or 3 where she's smiling and the kids around her are smiling. And that's what she posts on her Instagram. Here I am at the game, we had a great time. The difference between the diary and Instagram is the difference between living and performing. As Jonathan, 10th grade student, said today, Instagram is a highlight reel. It's a show that you put on to entertain, amuse, impress your peers. It's a performance. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with a performance. A performance is a show that you put on to entertain, amuse, or impress people, and there is nothing wrong with that. As long as you realize that the performance has to come to an end, and you take off your mask and resume your real life. My concern listening to American teens is that for many of them, and this is more often true for girls than for boys, they are trapped in what I call the cyber bubble of 24/7 texting and social media, and the performance never ends. The need to produce the daily highlight reel never ends, and it is exhausting and it is draining. These kids are hyper-connected to other same-age peers, but disconnected from themselves. Disconnected from themselves. Researchers are now finding that the more time a teenager spends on Instagram and other social media, the more likely that teen is to become depressed. The most powerful kinds of studies that demonstrate this are longitudinal cohort studies, such as the one shown here, where you recruit a large cohort of teens and then follow them over a period of years. And these researchers find that the more time kids spend on Instagram looking at other kids' Instagram, or looking to see how many likes they got on their own Instagram, the more likely they are to become depressed. And this is true for boys, but it's even more true for girls. It is a bigger effect for girls than it is for boys. So, Jean Twenge is really a master of the field that she has come to call cross-temporal analysis, looking at how kids have answered the same question over time, using surveys going back many years. And she reports that around 2012, she noticed abrupt shifts. Instead of gentle slopes in her line graphs, she was now seeing steep mountains and sheer cliffs, something she'd never seen before. She finds that American teens today are significantly more anxious compared with teens from the same demographic just 7 years ago. And use of smartphones predicts anxiety, depression, and impairment. That is true for affluent households. It is true for low-income households. It is true across the spectrum. What predicts depression and sadness? Use of social networking sites, surfing the net. What protects? Sports, participating in a religious service, reading a book. Use of smartphones is the key factor that predicts bad outcomes. There is not a single exception, quoting from Gene Twenge. All screen activities are linked to less happiness. All non-screen activities are linked to more happiness. Teens have always been concerned about missing out. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if 2 or 3 of your friends went to the coffee shop after school, you might not even know about it. Today, your nose will be rubbed in it because you're following them on Instagram. They're following you, and they're posting photos of the great time they had at Starbucks without you. Smartphones prioritize same-age peer relations. When you look at when scholars look at who American teens are following on their Instagram, it's mostly other teens, other kids they know. American teens are not bonding to adults in their community. Their relations are almost exclusively with other teens their own age. And smartphones prioritize those relations. You'll find much more on this topic in Gene Twenge's book, iGen. So I met with Kathy Charles at her office at Napier University. She also has been following kids in a longitudinal cohort study, different sample, but same results. Namely, the more time kids spend on social media, the more likely they are to become anxious and or depressed. And again, she found this was a bigger effect for girls than it was for boys. But she didn't know why. When I met with her, she could not explain the gender effect in her own data. So she was very interested when I shared with her other research showing that girls are very ready to believe that other girls are having more fun than they are, that other girls' lives are more interesting than their own life is. This turns out to be not at all true for most boys. Turns out that most boys greatly overestimate how interesting their own life is to other people. And girls use social media differently than boys do. Girl and a boy both get sick. They both throw up. The boy posts a photo of his own vomit on his Instagram. Girls never do that. Vanessa gets a cute puppy, takes 200 pictures of the puppy, posts a dozen pictures on her Instagram, but the puppy got loose, ran out, and got run over by a truck. She did not post a photo of the dead dog on her Instagram. Boys do. It would not be unusual for a boy to post a photo of the mangled corpse of his dog on his Instagram. Now put all these findings together and imagine a girl, 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age, in the evening, alone in her bedroom, looking at the other girl's Instagram. There's Emily at the football game, she's having a blast. There's Madison at the party, she's having a great time. There's Vanessa with her new puppy and a cute. I'm just sitting there not doing anything. My life sucks. The more time a girl spends on social media, the more likely she is to become depressed. That's a bigger effect for girls than it is for boys, and you've now learned 3 mechanisms that can explain that gender difference. First of all, the girls are more invested in their social media as a rule. If you don't like Jacob's photo of the pretty cheerleader, he doesn't care. But if you don't like Emily's photo of Emily, she's going to take it more personally. And this boy looking at Jared's vomit or Brett's dead dog is less likely to want to be Brett or Jared. And this boy greatly overestimates how interesting his own life is to begin with. So boys are, to some extent, on average, protected against some of the toxic effects of social media. Girls are more vulnerable, on average, to the toxic effects of social media. Boys are more vulnerable to the toxic effects of video games, which we're not going to get to tonight. Now, if a grown-up were sitting with that girl, based on the brain research, incidentally, a grown-up means a woman over 22, a man over 30. If a grown-up were sitting with that girl, the grown-up could explain, look, everybody's life is a mix of happy and sad, a mix of success and disappointment. And for most human beings who've ever lived, more disappointment than success. That's not a new finding. It's a very ancient finding. The grown-up could explain, look, those girls' lives are not existentially different from your own. Everybody's life is a mix of happy and sad. You have to choose to walk through life joyfully. How do you do that? How do you choose to walk through life joyfully? I think that's the first question on the road to maturity. But this girl sitting alone in her bedroom will not take that first step. Because she still thinks all the other girls are having a great time. She thinks she's the only one who is bored, frustrated, lonely, disappointed. So what can you do about it? Regarding social media. First step is to understand that most kids are not masters of time management. And the good news is there's lots of apps out there that are designed to help you do your job as a parent and make it easy. You need to install on your kid's phone and on their devices apps like NetNanny Mobile, My Mobile Watchdog. I've listed these in your handout. I have no affiliation with any of these programs. The first thing these programs will do is they will report back to you how much time what websites your child is visiting and how much time your child is spending at each website. That's step number one. Then you sit down with your child and say, look, over the last week you're spending on average 2 hours a day on Instagram. That's too much. You're busy, you're not getting enough sleep. With each group today, we talked about the importance of getting enough sleep. Lower school kids need 10 hours a night. Middle school and upper school kids need at least 9 hours a night. That's not a guess. We've got lots of good research on that point. And they're not getting it. And if you're sleep deprived, you're much more likely to be anxious, depressed, have trouble concentrating and focusing. 2 hours a day is too much on social media. I'm not suggesting you prohibit social media. I realize that for many American kids, Instagram is now a major mechanism by which they communicate with one another. I'm not prohibiting it, but you must limit, govern, and guide what your kids are doing in social media. These programs make it very easy to limit time on any particular website. I suggest no more than 20 minutes a day on any one social media site and no more than 40 minutes a day on social media total. Some parents are skeptical of these programs. They'll be like, oh, come on, my daughter's just going to Google, how do I get around parental controls on NetNanny? Well, I actually met some of the people who write the code for NetNanny. I've done many events across Silicon Valley. And I learned that NetNanny has full-time employees whose job is to Google the phrase, how do I get around parental controls on NetNanny? And if they find that a kid has discovered a hole, they patch it, usually within hours, and your app will update. These programs work, provided that you choose a strong password. A strong password, because your daughter may spend hours guessing your password. As long as you choose a strong password, these programs work. Let me give you a tip about choosing a strong password. The English poets, they don't teach those anymore. You learn them. Choose a line from a poem you remember that your daughter has never heard. I'm very fond of William Wordsworth. What though the radiance which was once so bright be now forever taken from our sight, though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower. All right. And now combine with some of that poetry the street address of the home in which you grew up. What though 18128? That's a really strong password. Your daughter's not likely to guess it. As long as you choose a strong password, these programs cannot be broken. That's one thing Silicon Valley knows how to do. And explain to your child, look, when I was growing up, my parents insisted on knowing where I was at all times. I have to know where you are at all times. So now it's not out there, it's online. I will know every website you visit and what you do there, because that's my job as your parent. Many girls are going to bed with their phone switched on. Some boys, many girls. And then at 2 in the morning, your daughter is getting a text. OMG, Jason and Melissa just broke up. This is really big news. We'll have to talk about this. And she's up for an hour in the middle of the night texting. Look, the rules of good parenting have not changed in 20 years. 20 years ago, a girl could not accept a phone call at 2 in the morning to gossip because the phone would ring. And the parents would not allow it because they knew it's more important for a kid to get a good night's sleep than to be up for an hour in the middle of the night exchanging gossip. That was true 20 years ago, and it's just as true today. The only thing that has changed is the technology. It's now very easy for your daughter to accept that text because the phone never rang. It buzzed. She has it on vibrate mode, and she's not talking, she's texting. But just because it's easy doesn't mean it should happen. This is your job. You know, some of the issues we're addressing this evening are not easy to fix. This one's real easy to fix. At 9 o'clock at night, the very latest, you take your phone from your child, son or daughter, you switch it off, take the phone from your child, take their phone, switch it off, put it in the charger which stays in the parents' bedroom. They can have it back tomorrow morning. This has to be your job. It is not reasonable to put this burden on your 15-year-old daughter. What is she supposed to say tomorrow in school when her friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight, how come you didn't answer? Is she supposed to say, well, researchers have found that sleep deprivation in adolescence is a major risk factor for anxiety and depression? Come on, that's ridiculous. You have to allow her to say, hey, my evil parents take my phone every night at 9 and we'll have it back till the next morning. This is your job. You have to be the evil parent. Now, when you get home this evening, and you inform your daughter that you attended a presentation by Dr. Leonard Sax, and Dr. Sax recommends you take her phone every night at 9 and let her have it back the next morning, she may not applaud. The first thing she's likely to say is, but I use it as my alarm clock. Let her know they still make actual alarm clocks. You can go to the store and buy one. They're not expensive. And now she may get really upset. Now she may say, but what if there's an emergency? Remind her that you still have a landline, a house phone in the parents' bedroom, which her friends are welcome to call in event of an emergency, and you, the parent, will pick up, and you, the parent, will decide whether this emergency warrants waking her up at 2 in the morning. It probably doesn't. It can probably wait. This has to be your job. No devices in the bedroom. No video game consoles in the bedroom. No phones in the bedroom. That's not just my opinion. Those are the official guidelines of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and you will find the link to the full text of the AAP guidelines in your handout. The AAP guidelines specify no unsupervised use of the internet. There should be no expectation of privacy. When a child is using the internet, the device should not be in the bedroom. It should be in a public space, like the kitchen or living room. Incidentally, there are many good reasons for that that I have experienced as a clinician. Mom says, well, but she's got all this homework. She's up till midnight every night doing her homework. Take the laptop out of the bedroom and put it in the kitchen where you are. And this is my practice as well. I sit at the kitchen table with my daughter. She's doing her stuff. I'm doing my stuff. But I'm there. I can see what she's doing. And the homework's done by 9 o'clock. Now, your daughter wasn't being dishonest. She just didn't realize how much time she was spending on Instagram and shopping sites. When the computer is in a public space, the homework gets done. No unsupervised use of the internet. Those are the AAP guidelines. Scholars define sexting as sending an obscene photo. They define obscene as the nipple of the female breast is exposed or the male or female genitalia are exposed. Sexting per se is unusual. What is now very common among American teen girls is what some scholars call not quite sexting. Every study published in the last 4 years has found that at least half of American teen girls are now engaged in this practice of not quite sexting, meaning you're sending a suggestive photo on Snapchat or posting it on Instagram. New York Magazine devoted an entire issue to this topic. That's not quite sexting. That is not obscene. The nipple of the breast is not exposed. The genitalia are not exposed. It's not obscene. It's not pornographic. It's not quite sexting. And some parents will push back. I was doing a presentation at another leading independent school. And the father said, he used the word puritanical. He said, Dr. Sax, I don't understand why you're being so puritanical. You just said it's not obscene. She's not going to get arrested. It's not pornography. Why are you being so puritanical? This girl is presenting herself as an object for the arousal and amusement of boys. Scholars call that self-objectification. And we have a great deal of research showing that girls who engage in this kind of activity are much more likely to agree with statements like how you look matters more than who you are. They are more likely to become anxious, less likely to be academically engaged. So in my own practice, I knew one 14-year-old girl well. She told me that her friend, another 14-year-old girl, I don't know the other girl, but she told me the other girl said to her, hey, how about I take some pictures of you taking your clothes off, you take some pictures of me taking my clothes off, and we'll send them to our boyfriends. What's the girl I know supposed to say? Well, what she actually did say was, I cannot do that because my parents have installed my mobile watchdog on my phone. Every photo I take goes immediately to my mom's phone and to her laptop before I even do anything with it. Go ahead. And she handed the phone to her friend, and her friend took a picture and called Mom at work and said, hey, Ms. Kirkpatrick, we just took some pictures. Did you see them? And Mom's looking, yeah, let's see, flowers in a vase. Gardenias? Okay, thanks, bye. And the girl who had proposed the striptease said, wow, that's amazing, she said. I wish my parents cared that much about me. They have no idea what I do with my phone. And the striptease did not happen. Now, during Q&A at another presentation for parents, a parent said, I don't understand why the striptease didn't happen, parent asked. They could have still done it with the other girl's phone. In your handout, you will find links to 2 studies of actual sexting in which researchers interviewed teenage girls and boys who are taking and sharing obscene photos that they have taken of their own body. And researchers asked each girl and each boy, why are you doing this? When you ask a 16-year-old boy, why is he doing this? The most common answer to the 16-year-old boy is because he really enjoys doing it. That's why. It is not unusual to find a 16-year-old American boy who really enjoys taking a picture of his own erect penis and sending it to a 15-year-old girl And furthermore, you find that the 16-year-old boy is absolutely convinced and certain that the 15-year-old girl will be excited and aroused to receive it. He doesn't know that the 15-year-old girl will very likely be disgusted and repulsed to have this on her phone. He doesn't know that. He's 16. He's got a long way to go. But then the researchers asked the 15-year-old girl, why are you doing this? And the most common answer the 15-year-old girl gives is some variation on, well, I wish I didn't have to. And the researcher says, what do you mean you wish you didn't have to? You don't have to. No one's holding a gun to your head making you do this. And the girl says, yeah, but at this school, it's what the cool girls do. It's kind of like your job description. Why did the striptease not take place? I think it did not take place because I don't think either girl really wanted to do it. And having this app on the girl's phone gave them an excuse to say no. You need to give your daughter an excuse. You must install on your daughter's phone and your son's phone these apps and explain to them, if I see any inappropriate photo, you lose the device indefinitely. So I visited a leading independent school. Very well regarded. A 12-year-old girl had a 14-year-old boyfriend at the school. He asked her to send him some photos. Nothing obscene. He just wanted to see her take off her blouse to reveal her bra. So she went into her bedroom, closed the door, locked the door, and did as he had asked. Took some pictures of herself taking off her blouse, keeping her bra on. This is not obscene. It's, again, not quite sexting. And she sent the photographs to him using Snapchat with a 5-second self-destruct. Snapchat claims that you can send a photo using Snapchat with, say, a 5-second self-destruct, and after the recipient has seen the photo for 5 seconds, it will vanish without a trace. And if the recipient tries to save the photo, you, the sender, will be notified. She believed Snapchat. Snapchat knows their claim to be a false claim. They keep making it anyhow. But they're perfectly well aware that there are dozens of apps available for free online whose function is to allow you to save a photo sent via Snapchat without the sender being notified. The boys always know about these. The girls rarely know. I made sure all the girls knew about it today, the older girls. It turns out the boys really want to save the girls' photos. The girls aren't that interested in saving the boys' photos. This boy had saved every photo the girl sent. School administrators later determined that this boy did not intend for anyone else to see the photos. But he was at a party, and he set his phone down, grabbed some chips, turned to talk to a friend. When I met with the older students today, I told them, if you have one of these, it never leaves your person. If you're a boy, it's always in your pocket. If you're a girl and you don't have a pocket, it's in your purse, held against your body. You never allow there to be separation between you and your phone. You never turn your back on your phone. That's basic digital hygiene, which I emphasize to all the high school students today. Well, this boy had never heard that. He set his phone down. A few seconds later, another boy wandered over. The phone was still unlocked. Picked up the phone, found the gallery, found this girl's photos, forwarded each of the girl's photos to his own phone, exited the gallery, and set the phone down exactly where he'd found it. First boy didn't know anything had happened. Second boy then posted all of these girls' photos to his own Instagram. Within 3 days, everyone at the school had seen them. Boys this girl didn't even know were coming up to her and saying, hey, Emily, how about you put on a striptease for us? This girl had been invited to a 3-day ski weekend The girl whose parents were hosting the weekend, paying for the bus to drive the girls to the mountain, paying for lodging at the mountain, paying for the lift tickets. The birthday girl whose parents were paying for all this called up this girl and said, I really hate to make this phone call, but my mom is totally freaking out because all the other girls' moms are calling my mom and telling her that if you're going to be there, they won't let their daughter go because they now think you're some kind of bad influence. So I have to uninvite you. I'm really sorry. I have to uninvite you. This girl had no psychiatric history. She'd always done well in school, had lots of friends. She collapsed. Refused to go to school, hysterical crying, started cutting herself with razor blades, saying her life was over, that the pictures would always be online, which is probably true. Many other boys had picked them up. Parents took her to the doctor. The doctor prescribed Lexapro 10 milligram and recommended counseling. That accomplished nothing. So now you have a 12-year-old girl with no psychiatric history who has depression, not responding to medication or counseling. Who's to blame? The girl? Her boyfriend? The other boy? No, they're kids. The parents are to blame. Look, this is a very grown-up device. With this device, I can take a photo and send that photo, and once I send it, I have no control over what happens to that photo. I can't get it back. I can't limit where it goes. That's a very grown-up functionality. To put such a device in the hands of a minor child, like putting a 12-year-old behind the wheel of a sports car with no driver ed. If you're going to give your child a smartphone, you are responsible for every photo they take, every photo they send. So I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, and I'm very specific in my guidelines. Based on the research, at what age is it reasonable for a child to possess a smartphone, by which I mean a phone that can take a picture and send a picture? Certainly, no child under 13 should possess such a phone, and most 13-year-olds are not ready for it. And if you're going to give your child a smartphone, you must install on the phone an app like NetNanny Mobile and explain to your child, I will see every photo you take. I will know every website you visit. That's my job. Or don't give your kid a smartphone. And some parents say, oh, come on, that's totally unrealistic. My daughter's doing all these activities after school. What if her ride doesn't show up? There aren't any payphones anymore. I don't want her to go up to a stranger and ask to borrow their phone. All right, I get that. I'm the father of a daughter. That's not an argument for a smartphone. That's an argument for a dumb phone. Dumb phone is a phone that can make a phone call and receive a phone call, and that's all it can do. There are many of them around. They're actually called basic phones. Many styles available. You don't know about them because they're not marketed to you. They're marketed to the elderly. My father-in-law lives with us. This is his phone. It has big numbers. He's 82. It has big numbers, big dial, and he tells me the battery never dies. He charges it like once every 3 months. You don't need 4G, you don't need 3G, it works everywhere. This takes care of the safety issues. Give your daughter one of these. She can call you from wherever if she needs to talk to you. But don't give your kid a smartphone. Or if you're going to give your kid a smartphone, you must install on that phone an app like NetNanny Mobile, My Mobile Watchdog. But some parents are reluctant. At another one of these presentations, a mother said to me, look, I don't want to violate my daughter's privacy. If she doesn't want me to see her photos, I'm fine with that. I don't want to see her photos if she doesn't want me to see. I respect her privacy. And I told that parent, look, the most important thing you must teach your daughter or son is that there is no such thing as privacy whenever you share a photo electronically. I could see that mom was not persuaded. But then subsequently I discovered 3 magic words which have persuaded just about every parent on this topic. The three magic words are General David Petraeus. If you don't recall the story, I will refresh your memory. David Petraeus graduated top of his class at West Point, first in his class at Fort Leavenworth, earned a doctorate at Princeton, brigadier general at age 46. George W. Bush appointed him commanding general. Barack Obama then appointed him director of the CIA. You would think he would know that there is no such thing as privacy to any photo that you share electronically, but somehow he didn't get that memo. And he and his mistress, Paula Broadwell, thought, we're so smart, we've got our secure websites and our passwords that nobody will guess. Bzzz, wrong. Career over. Okay, what's the moral of the story of David Petraeus and Paula Broadwell? Well, there are several morals. One is, don't cheat on your spouse. Another moral is, there is no such thing as privacy to any photo that you share electronically. Privacy is great. You want to share a photo privately, here's what you do. You print it out on a piece of photo paper, take the hard copy over to your friend, show it to them, and then shred it. That's privacy. There is no such thing as privacy to any photo that you share electronically, and David Petraeus can tell you all about it. Don't share any photo unless you're prepared to see it in the newspaper tomorrow. That's the moral of the story of David Petraeus and Paula Broadwell. And you don't teach that virtue by preaching. You don't teach any virtue by preaching. You teach virtue by inculcating virtuous habits and by not allowing bad habits to rise up. By saying, look, I will see every photo you take. And if I see anything inappropriate, you lose the device. I've done a great many events across Colorado. Usually fly into Denver, drive south to Colorado Springs, make a right turn, drive another half an hour southwest, come to a beautiful little town called Canyon City. Resort town, smaller town, tight-knit community, great place to raise a family is what everybody says. More than 100 students at Canyon City High School were trading obscene photos. They were using a Vault app. Looks like a calculator. You pick up your kid's phone, you see a calculator app, tap on the calculator, it's a full function calculator. Add, subtract, multiply, divide. But enter a 4, 5, or 6 digit passcode, and the calculator vanishes, and you have a vault of obscene photos. Kids were taking obscene photos of themselves and sharing them using this app, which is designed for this purpose. All the popular kids were doing it. Parents were furious. Local police determined that most of the sharing was going on Saturday evenings and Sunday afternoons from kids' bedrooms. Nevertheless, the parents demanded the resignation of the principal, which makes no sense. He has no jurisdiction over what kids do in their bedrooms on the weekend. The parents failed to see it wasn't the principal's fault, it was the parents' fault. If any one of those parents had installed Net Nanny Mobile or My Mobile Watchdog, they would have immediately seen what was going on. Not a single parent had installed a monitoring app on their kid's phone. All the parents were clueless. If you're 16 and you take an obscene photograph of yourself and share it with your 16-year-old friend, you have produced and distributed child pornography. That is a Class 3 felony, punishable by up to 6 years in prison, and requiring that you register as a convicted sex offender anywhere you live in the United States for the next 20 years. That is not wiped clean when you turn 18. Don't put your kid in this situation. If you're going to give your kid a smartphone, it is your responsibility to know what they're doing with it. So very recently, I was doing one of these presentations, and a parent said, I don't think I need one of those apps. I think I'm really up to speed with what my teenager's doing with their phone. I check their phone regularly, look at the gallery, look at the recently installed apps. I don't think I need one of those monitoring apps. All right. That dad is mistaken. The first thing that these Vault apps do is make sure that they do not show up under recently installed apps. Look, there's an arms race going on. And the kids are telling other kids about, hey, install this app, your parents won't know. It won't show up in recently installed apps. Looks like a calculator, if they even see it. The makers of the Vault apps hide the apps. They will not show up. There are dozens of these on the market. They are free. Vaulty, Gallery Vault. Gallery Vault provides a dummy password. This parent thinks they're up to speed, says, hey, I tapped on this and it's looking for a password. You enter a dummy password, and it redirects to your clean gallery. Or parent comes in and says, what you doing? You just shake the phone, and it returns to the home screen. Parent has no idea. Gallery Vault has had 10 million downloads from American teens. You are not up to speed. You are not a full-time IT professional specializing in the apps used by teenagers. The people who make these apps are. You need to have a professional on your side. I have no affiliation with these programs, but you must install a program like NetNanny Mobile or My Mobile Watchdog. They understand the Vault apps, and they will alert you to one of these apps being installed. The notion that you can look at a kid's phone and have any idea of how they are using the phone is 2007. You are many years out of date. You are not up to speed. The lesson of Canyon City High School is you must install a monitoring app. The people making the monitoring apps are on top of these issues. That's their job. Either install the monitoring app or give your child a basic phone. Those are the only two options for responsible parents, in my judgment, based on what I am seeing and hearing. So I know I come across as not a very nice person. I'm working on that. But, and I don't mean to sound angry, because, I get it. I really understand why parents are not up to speed. 20 years ago, there used to be a public service announcement would come on American television at 10 o'clock at night. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? We were raised in that era. It's 10 o'clock. My daughter's home alone in her bedroom upstairs. So I'm a good parent, right? No, not right. The challenges have changed. She may be alone in her bedroom, but if she's got a smartphone, she could be uploading pornography, he could be downloading pornography. She could be engaged in cyberbullying, he could be a victim of cyberbullying. This is a different era. The challenges today are different. You've got to be the parent. And American parents are so confused. So many of them want to be their kid's best friend. But a friend is a peer. A friend cannot command. A friend cannot say, I will not allow you to pig out on ice cream right before supper. Only a parent can say that. A friend cannot say, I'm taking your device and turning off the lights so you can get some sleep. Only a parent can say that. And a parent must say that. That's your job. If you're going to give your kid a smartphone, you must install on the phone an app like My Mobile Watchdog, NetNanny Mobile. And some parents go a little further. Some parents do a little quality control. One mother sent her daughter an anonymous text. Hey, hot stuff, I'm new in town. Will you send me some pictures? Daughter responded, no, I know this is you, Mom, please stop. Proud of you, honey, keep making good choices. Love, Mom. So what really matters? What should our top priority be as parents? You know, until recently that would have been a matter of opinion or a guess. Not anymore. We now have good empirical research that informs the answer to that question. I'm talking now about longitudinal cohort studies in which researchers recruit a large number of kids and follow them throughout childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood. These studies allow us to answer the question, what malleable characteristic of a child, what characteristic in a child that I could change, best predicts good outcomes in adulthood? Outcomes like having a job, being in good health, not being addicted to drugs or alcohol, not being convicted of a felony. Turns out that whether you're earning an A or B does not predict health or wealth or happiness. And so many kids at this school and at many leading independent schools are so frantic about, oh my gosh, I got to get straight A's or I won't get into the top school. But getting straight A's and getting into the top school do not predict good outcomes at 32 years of age. They do not. I defend that statement at considerable length in my book, The Collapse of Parenting. What predicts good outcomes? Virtue and character predicts good outcomes. And when I say character, I mean conscientiousness. Conscientiousness means self-control and honesty. Well, how do you measure self-control in a 12-year-old? You don't talk to the 12-year-old, you talk to the classmates and the teacher. And you say, can this kid take turns? Can this kid listen to other kids and to the grown-ups? Low self-control measured at 12 years of age predicts a high risk of drug and alcohol abuse 20 years down the road. Low self-control at 12 years of age predicts a high risk of poor physical health 20 years down the road. Conversely, high self-control at 12 years of age predicts a low risk of drug and alcohol abuse 20 years down the road. Low self-control at age 12 predicts a high risk of financial struggles 20 years down the road, whether reported by the individual or by a neighbor. High self-control at age 12 predicts a low risk of financial struggles 20 years down the road. Low self-control at age 12 predicts a low credit score 20 years down the road. High self-control at age 12 predicts a high credit score 20 years down the road. What really matters? What should our top priority be as parents? It should be to teach virtue and character. That's not a sermon. It's not a guess. It's a robust empirical finding. I devoted 2 chapters of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, to reviewing every relevant longitudinal cohort study that I could find. And there are a great many. And every one of them comes to the same conclusion, that character, conscientiousness, predicts health, wealth, and happiness much more powerfully than any other parameter that you can affect. And the funny thing is that American parents used to teach that to their kids, even before we had this research. American parents 20 years ago would commonly say things like, hey, I'd rather you get a C on the test honestly than cheat and get an A. But today it is common to hear parents at leading independent schools say, hey, you want to get into Stanford? You got to have incredible grades, because you're not just competing against American kids, you're competing against kids from Japan, China, Europe. And there has been an explosion in cheating among American kids over the last 20 years, which I document. Dr. James Heckman, Nobel Prize winner, University of Chicago, has spent 40 years working with one of these longitudinal cohort studies that enrolled kids in infancy and followed them through 38 years of age. And he concludes that grades and test scores are poor predictors of success in life because they only measure cognitive achievement. Character plays the pivotal role. What parameter, measured when a child is 12 years of age, powerfully predicts health and wealth and happiness in that individual 20 years down the road? It is self-control and other measures of conscientiousness like honesty. I'm not saying the other four shown here are not important. They are important. But none of them predict health and wealth and happiness, all three. Some of them predict one or none of those outcomes, and they don't predict it very powerfully. Self-control, conscientiousness predicts health and wealth and happiness and predicts it much stronger than any of the others predict any one of those outcomes. Psychologists have known for many years that every human personality can be mapped on a five-dimensional space. The 5 dimensions of human personality are conscientiousness and its subtraits of self-control and honesty, openness to new ideas, friendliness and agreeableness, emotional stability, and extroversion, introversion. Some elements of human personality are not amenable to change, notably extroversion, introversion. It seems to be pretty hardwired. But it turns out that, and I should add that personality becomes more fixed as we age, but even young adults can change significantly on some traits, and it turns out that self-control and honesty are very amenable to change. How do you improve your child's self-control? You say, no dessert until you eat your broccoli. No games until all the chores are done and all the homework is done. And I encourage you to say that. And if that has not been the practice in your home, sit your child down and say, you know, we've been doing some things wrong. We're going to make some changes. No dessert until you eat your broccoli. No games until all the chores are done and all the homework is done. No devices at the dinner table. If that has not been the rule in your house, and you make that announcement, there will be an explosion. And the older the child, the bigger the explosion. But if both parents stand their ground, after 6 weeks, you will have a child with better self-control. I've seen this, it's well documented. And you will probably have a happier child as well. So that's the job of the parent, to teach virtue and character. But that requires that you teach from a position of authority. If you say, well, my own personal opinion is I personally wouldn't cheat, but that's just me. You go and do whatever you want. That's not teaching. That's of no value at all. Teaching virtue requires that you teach from a position of authority. And as recently as 20 years ago, it was common for American parents to say things like, do unto others. That's not a question, it's a command. I have witnessed the collapse of American parenting firsthand. As a medical doctor in this country over the last 30 years, I've seen that command, do unto others, soften and morph into a question. It is now common for American parents, instead of commanding, do unto others, instead they pose a question. The command has morphed into a question, and the question is often something like, well, how would you feel if someone did that to you? And the parent has no idea what to say when the son responds, if someone did that to me, I'd kick him in the nuts and then I'd sit on his face. Your mission is to teach character. And you know what? That is the mission of the school as well, of any good school. And there used to be an alliance between the school and the parents. I have seen this. As recently as 20 years ago, if a child were disciplined at school for cheating or lying, the child would probably face stiffer punishment at home. The teacher would call the parents, explain what happened, and the kid could expect to be disciplined at home at least as severely as they were disciplined at school. That alliance has fractured. Today, when a child is disciplined at school, it is becoming increasingly common for the parents to swoop in like attorneys, demanding evidence and mounting a defense. Don't do that. Don't do that. No matter what the outcome is, you lose and your child loses. Even if you are successful and the school drops the reprimand, you've greatly undermined the authority of the school in your child's mind. You should be on the same team with the school. The school wants to teach virtue and character to your child. So do you. You need to work together. Support your teachers and school leaders. That's a challenge today, especially in the United States. Your big challenge is that you live in the United States. I took this photo in Times Square. Pepsi slogan, live for now. Don't worry about the sugar, live for now. If it feels good, do it. Live for now. Whatever floats your boat, live for now. Get what you can while the getting's good. Live for now was not characteristic of American culture 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. But it is characteristic of American culture today. American culture has become a toxic culture. The real hazard of American culture today, by which I mean the culture of Instagram, Justin Bieber, Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, Miley Cyrus, and mainstream pornography. The culture of if it feels good, do it, whatever floats your boat, is that it mindfully and intentionally undermines self-control and disrespects parental authority. So we began this evening by talking about Robert Putnam's finding that bonds across generations have been broken. What can you do about it? You have to restore the bonds. Eat supper with your kids. No devices allowed at the table for parents or for kids. You have to communicate to your child, hey, you are the most important thing in my life right now. The phone can wait. The benefits of supper with a parent at home are huge. Frank Elgar and his colleagues interviewed more than 10,000 adolescents coast to coast and asked them, in the last 7 days, how many meals have you had at home with a parent? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then for each of these 10,000 plus adolescents, quantified internalizing problems like anxiety and depression, externalizing problems like hitting the wall in anger, positive well-being, pro-social behavior, and life satisfaction, and found, a huge effect, not just comparing 0 to 7, but at almost every step along the way. Let's compare 5 evening meals at home with a parent with 6 evening meals at home with a parent. Going from 5 to 6, we see a significant decrease in internalizing problems, a significant decrease in externalizing problems, a significant increase in positive well-being, pro-social behavior, and life satisfaction. And yet what has happened? A different group of researchers asked teenagers, in the last 24 hours, have you had a meal at home with a parent? In 1992, 2/3 of teenagers said, yes, I have. In 2005, 2/3 of teenagers said, no, I have not. That's a huge change in a very short period of time. You've got to fight for supper at home. I find many parents who are picking their kid up from school, even a young child, picking up their young child from school, lower school child, and taking the child to soccer practice and then driving the child to a play date and eating a quick supper in the car on the way from soccer to the play date. The unintended message is that a meal at home with family is the lowest priority. that same-age peer relations are more important than family. That's the message you're sending. My recommendation, cancel the play date. Make a family date instead. Family is more important than same-age peer relations. So my wife and I went to the new car dealer for the first time in many years, and we were horrified and astonished when the salesman wanted to sell us the rear seat entertainment system and handed us this flyer. Well, let's look. The two kids are wearing headphones, looking at a screen. Mom is smiling, looking back at her children as if to say, hey, this is great. We can drive 5 hours, never have to talk to my kids at all. What are we thinking? Time in the car is precious. It's private time. Everybody's busy. No earbuds, no headsets in the car for anybody. When you're in the car, you should be listening to your daughter, and she should be listening to you, not to Miley Cyrus or Justin Bieber. American parents are so confused. They think they have to choose between being the tiger mom relentlessly pushing their kid to achieve, or being the Irish setter dad who just wants to lay back and let kids do whatever they want. It's a false dichotomy. The last chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, is titled The Meaning of Life. What I mean there is that you must impart to your child your sense of what human life is about. What's the point of it? And the answer better be more than getting into Stanford, because that's not a good enough answer. It doesn't satisfy. It's got to be about more than what college you go to or how much money you earn. It's got to be real. Because without that context, there's no point. And working hard to get a good mark just becomes a race to nowhere, to borrow the title of a documentary making that point. And the result is anxiety, depression, and disengagement. But you can't be the Irish setter dad and let kids do whatever they desire unless you have first educated desire. Because researchers are finding that when you let American kids do whatever they desire, what American teen girls most desire is going on social media, and what American teen boys most desire is pornography and video games. It's your job to instill a longing for something better than that. So we began with the question, why are American kids today so much more likely to be anxious, depressed, or disengaged compared with American kids a generation ago, compared to kids around the country today? And what can we do about it? My answers. Parents have allowed relations with same-age peers to displace the family. But you can change that. Parents have allowed social media to displace real-world experience, but you can change that. American parents have largely failed to teach virtue and character with authority, but you can change that. Again, you'll find much more on these topics in my books, Why Gender Matters, Girls on the Edge, Boys Adrift, and The Collapse of Parenting. Again, the handout is online, www.leonardsax.com/glenelg.pdf. You must include the www and the .pdf, and it is lowercase. Stephen, can you bring the house lights up? Your comments, your questions, stories, disagreements about anything that I have said this evening. Yes?
Thank you very much. I'll start from the standpoint of I agree with pretty much everything you said. That's where I'm coming from. But how I have daughters, and I want to limit all of these things, and I have, but they're getting older now, and the pushback I get from other parents is you're going to basically stifle their social lives if you don't allow them access to. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I had a very interesting conversation with another mother who told her 14-year-old daughter, I'm taking your phone. You're not going to have a phone anymore. She said, you didn't do anything wrong. I just am concerned that you're spending every free moment looking at your phone. And there's more to life, so no more phone. And the girls' friends are fine with it. They're like, oh, you know her, she's got the weird mom who took her phone away. This mother told me that the pushback has come not from other girls, but from the mothers of other girls, who she tells me are relentless and hostile and constantly telling her, you are depriving her. She is totally missing out. This is what American girls do now. She's going to be like ostracized and no one will talk to her. And none of this is true. She's not ostracized, and she has more face-to-face encounters with her friends than she did previously. And this mother told me her assessment is that the other parents are uneasy. And they are projecting their own uneasiness in this anger. Now, you know, I don't know if that's true or not, kind of amateur psychodynamic analysis there, but you have to do what is right for your child. And it's going to be different from what many of your neighbors do. So let me tell you something that's not public, and that is that the title and subtitle you see there are not mine. Non-celebrity authors don't get to choose their subtitle, especially. The title and subtitle that I chose for this book, that I sent to the publisher, the title was The Collapse of American Parenting, and the subtitle was Why Most Kids Would Now Be Better Off Raised Outside the United States. But non-celebrity authors don't get to choose their title, and certainly not their subtitle, so I was overruled. The original title made a good deal of sense. Kids raised in the United States speaking English at home are now at greatly increased risk of bad outcomes compared to kids in Scotland, in Switzerland, in New Zealand. So what are your options? Well, one option is to move to New Zealand. And the original book had a closing appendix titled, When is it time to move? Publisher got rid of that as well. If you're going to stay here, you need to do things differently. You need to tell your child, first of all, you're not going to be the popular kid. You're certainly not going to be the most popular kid. The most popular kid is the kid who is using the Vault app, sending obscene photos, engaging in drug and alcohol use. We now have good research showing that being the most popular kid at an American school is now a major risk factor for drug and alcohol abuse. This was not true in the United States 30 years ago. It is true today. So explain to your kid, you're not going to be the most popular kid, because being the most popular kid means being disrespectful, means concealment from your parents. We're not doing that. You will not be the most popular kid. But the other parents claim that your daughter will be ostracized and have no friends if she doesn't have a phone isn't true. I'm not suggesting, again, that you eliminate social media, but you need to limit, govern, and guide what your kids are doing online. And you have to have courage. It does take courage. When all the other parents, or it seems like all the other parents are saying, how can you do this? You're totally depriving your daughter. Hand them a copy of my book. Lend your copy to them. But don't think you're going to necessarily change their mind. My book is really not written to make converts. I learned years ago that that parent who believes that kids know better than parents do what is best for them, that parent will not be persuaded by anything I have to say. My book is written for you, the parent who knows what's right but needs some support, needs some evidence, needs some citations, needs some scholarship, needs some encouragement. And so I hope it will be helpful for you. Other comments, questions, stories, disagreements? Yes, ma'am.
So
Yes. Yes, absolutely. There are apps for the laptop. NetNanny for the phone is called NetNanny Mobile. NetNanny for the laptop is called NetNanny. I know NetNanny is the one I know the best. There's dozens of them out there now. Because, again, this is a growth industry. More and more parents are expressing concern. There's lots of apps out there. I don't endorse one over the other. I know some a little better than others, but there are many, many options available. Yes?
You can also put firewalls, and you can firewall wireless at home, and that
Mhm.
that can control what sites to get to, what they can see, what
Yep.
they can download, what they can upload.
The router.
The router itself, absolutely. It's got a firewall in it these days.
Mhm.
And you also can set like a baseline standard that says, say, nothing online ever that you don't want to explain to Mrs. Williams, Mr. Ventry, or your grandmother.
Yep.
Just baseline, this is how you know. Because at some point they're going to say something else.
Yep. Other comments? Yes, ma'am. Well, I think it depends. This is a issue where you want to talk to that parent. So if you say, look, I really don't want my daughter looking at the web without supervision, can you enforce that? And the parent says, no, I have no interest in what the kids do in their bedroom. Then I think you have to say no. But if the parent says, I respect your wishes, and even though it's not what I want for my daughter, when your daughter's here, they won't be looking at things online. Again, you're not going to be able to make converts, or very seldom can you persuade that parent who is convinced that you should let kids do whatever they want. But I have seen that you can persuade that parent to respect your rights as the parent of your daughter. And that parent may say, my daughter will continue to have unsupervised access, but when your daughter's over, they won't be in the bedroom. But if they won't do that, then yes, I do think you need to say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to go to that house. You've got to be the evil parent. Other comments? Yes, ma'am.
What I thought was very interesting, he told me a lot about the talk and a lot about the conversation of the kids. What he left out was sexting.
We didn't discuss it.
Okay, because I was going to ask you what their response was, because we actually have talked about it. I carpool boys and girls, and we talked about it in the car. It was a very small conversation. So
Yeah.
I was interested in how the kids reacted.
No. No. Look, I've done a lot of these presentations, a lot of these conversations with students, and one of my objectives is I don't want the head of school to get an angry phone call from the parent saying, my daughter came home and said most American girls are posting sexy photos of themselves, and so she's going to start doing it. If you're going to talk about sexting, you have to talk about the fact that the majority of American teen girls are now engaged in not quite sexting. But I certainly don't want to say that to girls at this school. That's not constructive. That instead is going to make that girl who's not doing it feel like, wow, I'm really the weirdo here. No, but I was very impressed by how articulate the students were and how courageous many of the students were. I especially want to shout out to Vinny, 17-year-old. I asked the students who here is on Snapchat, who's on Instagram, who's on any of these social media. Almost all the hands went up. I said, who here is not on any social media? And 3 kids raised their hand. One was Vinny, who is 17 but looks much older. And I said, would you care to share with your peers why you're not on any social media? And he said, because I don't see that anything good will come of it. That takes a lot of courage. courage when you've just seen that almost every other kid in your grade is on social media to stand up and say, I don't think anything good will come of it. So I commended him. Jonathan, the 10th grader, I asked the students, what's the difference between the diary and Instagram? And Jonathan said, the diary is private, and Instagram is just a highlight reel of your best moments that you want other people to see, very selective. Again, very articulate and thoughtful. So I was very impressed by the students. Many did not agree because, well, you know the recommendations I made regarding social media. We also talked a good bit about video games. I shared with the students and I believe that the guidelines are, I'm sure the guidelines are in your handout for video games. But the guidelines created by the researchers who studied video games, no more than 40 minutes a night on school nights, no more than an hour a day on weekends, and your minutes do not roll over. No video games until the chores are done and the homework is done. No violent video games. And again, in your handout, you'll find a lot more about video games. And a lot of the boys especially were pushing back. But still, we had a constructive exchange. I thought it was time well spent. I hope we'll start that conversation. Yes, ma'am.
So the results that you mentioned of the longitudinal studies, 30 plus years, are very powerful, obviously. Instagram's been around for 8 years. So how are scholars reconciling that? What are they looking to, and what are they telling parents? What kind of research do you find?
Well, again, a real leader here is Jean Twenge, Twenge, who I mentioned earlier. Because again, we have inventories, questionnaires that have been administered to a broad cross-section of American teens going back many decades. And what we're finding is an explosion in anxiety and depression among American teens that began in 2010. As I mentioned earlier, Jean Twenge is finding that American teens are much more anxious today compared to American teens just 7 years ago. Well, what happened 7 years ago? Instagram happened 7 years ago. And even though it's only been seven years and 3 months since Instagram launched, we're already getting lots of data on the harm of these social media. One analogy I use in several of my books is to alcohol. Imagine that alcoholic beverages had just been discovered 10 years ago. How long would it take us to figure out that maybe it's not a good idea for 15-year-olds to drink alcohol? It might take a while, you know? I'm not saying alcohol is bad. I think it's fine for adults to engage in moderate drinking. But I don't think 14-year-olds should drink alcohol at all. And that's very much my attitude towards social media. Social media, I believe, are going to have an effect on human culture, at least as profound as alcoholic beverages. And they're brand new. And I think it's going to take us a little while to figure out, you know what, maybe 13-year-olds should not imbibe. Maybe this is something that should be reserved for adults. Or that if it's going to be offered to kids, it needs to be severely monitored or carefully monitored. You know, I have visited with families across Europe. In Germany, it is very common for a family meal to include a glass of wine for a 13-year-old. I'm not condemning that. It is part of the family meal, and it's part of the culture. But I don't think that there is any circumstance in which a 13-year-old should be off in their room doing a fifth of whiskey by themselves. Likewise, I'm not saying social media are evil, and I think with parents involved, they can be constructive. But I don't think kids should be alone in their bedroom spending hours a day on social media. And I see the evidence moving in this direction. The problem for us as parents You know, the theoretical physicist has the luxury of waiting for proof. And they can refrain from committing to any particular theory until they are convinced that the proof is sufficient. We can't do that as parents. The Surgeon General of the United States raised concern about cigarettes in 1964. And for many decades, the tobacco industry claimed that, oh, that's just ridiculous, it's just an association, it's not causal. 30 years elapsed between the first warning by the Surgeon General in 1964 and the emergence of consensus in the medical community in the mid-90s that smoking certainly causes lung cancer and raises the risk of emphysema and other pulmonary diseases. We are in that interval, but you can't wait 30 years. You have to make decisions right now about what social media your child is going to use and whether or not you're going to limit, govern, and guide that. I think the evidence is sufficient for you to limit, govern, and guide what your kids are doing online. I present that evidence in, especially in my book, Why Gender Matters, regarding gender differences in social media and video games. So parents will say, well, is it proven? Proven beyond a reasonable doubt? No. That's a very high standard. But you can't wait for that standard. You are making decisions right now. And your refusal to make a decision is itself a decision. Is your child going to use these devices or not? You don't have the luxury of waiting for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to act based on the evidence available. And what I'm trying to do in the books is present you the evidence so that you can make up your own mind. Other comments, questions? Yes, sir.
The emphasis here seems very strongly on prevention, almost an mention of education. I'm a nerd. I'm a giant nerd, and when you talk about a diary in 1998, I laugh a little bit because I'm already writing online in 1990s. And some of these things are learnable skills. There are better and worse ways to use these things. And some of the things you mentioned about bad use of social media are frankly things that a lot of adults say. What is the track to follow? Is there a track to follow in terms of educating better use, other than just constraint?
Okay, sure. So 2 comments. First
Dr.
of all,
Sachs, before you
one
answer,
of the
maybe
boys
we
at
could at
school
least,
today,
let me say this before you answer, since
Yeah.
so many people are leaving. I did want to make sure that we had an opportunity to thank you, not only for your wonderful talk, but for being so resilient for so long tonight. So thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Sachs.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And maybe the rest of the questions could be directed to you, depending on how much longer you want to stay. It's pretty late.
9:15, the night is young.
These guys have kids, they've got to get up. So,
Well, okay,
you know.
but let me at least answer this question.
Absolutely, thanks.
So 2 comments I want to make. First of all, a very enlightened young man who was here today, I was talking about how I shared with the students, I'm going to advise your parents this evening that they need to install an app on your phones to monitor what you're doing and make sure that you're not wasting a lot of time on your phones. And this high school boy said, how do we install the app on our parents' phones? And the point he was making is that some of the parents are not good role models. Some of the parents are wasting time. Some of the parents are using social media inappropriately or spending too much time on social media. And I talk about that in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, and I say that to become a better parent, you're going to have to become a better person. You cannot teach a virtue which you yourself do not possess. If you're going to teach your kids to use social media appropriately, you must use social media appropriately, and that may mean that you need to change some things that you are doing and spend less time on social media. The second part of your comment about education as opposed to just constraint. Again, a very courageous 10th grade girl here today made almost exactly the same comment that you did, although from the perspective of a 10th grader, she said, Dr. Sax, you keep saying you're going to tell the parents that they should do this. You're going to tell the parents that they should do this. Why don't you just speak to us? Why don't you educate us and speak to us as agents in our own right instead of expecting the parents to do this? And we were talking about a phone in the bedroom. And I said, I can see that you're very courageous. I said to this girl, and you may be courageous enough when your friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight, how come you didn't answer? You may be courageous enough to say, because I thought it's more important for me to get a good night's sleep than to answer your text. But most American kids are not that courageous. The reason that I think education is important, and I endorse the school's efforts to educate kids about the risks of social media. But this is a presentation for parents, not a workshop for teachers. And in the presentation for parents, you must limit, govern, and guide what kids are doing online. Over the long term, I agree. Education has to be the way to go. We must make sure kids understand the risks of social media, of video games, of all kinds of concerns online. And I think the school is trying to do that. But in a presentation, and when I speak to teachers, when we have the opportunity, we talk about that. But this is a presentation for parents. So I think you're making a good point. We do need to educate the kids, but that properly belongs to a workshop for teachers rather than a presentation for parents. So let's go ahead and adjourn. I know a lot of you do have babysitters at home. I'll hang around for those who have questions. Thank you very much.